A goat path through the mountains sealed the fate of an army. 20,000 Persian troops slipped around the rear of the Greek line, and the men left to hold the gap. Leonidas, his 300 Spartans, and a handful of allies chose to die where they stood. Afterward, the Persian king had the fallen king's severed head fixed to a pole. Then 200,000 Persian soldiers poured into Greece, torching cities and defiling shrines. In answer, Sparta would eventually field the largest fighting force in its history to settle the score. By the early 5th century BC, Persia had swallowed nearly every major civilization that came before it. Egypt, Babylon, Lydia, Phoenicia, Media, and dozens more, stitching them into one empire stretching from the Indus to the Aegean, from the Nile to the Caucasus. Tribute rolled in constantly. Gold dust from India, incense from Arabia, ivory from Ethiopia, silver from Phoenicia and Babylon. The king's yearly income dwarfed all of Greece's combined budgets 30-fold. Anchoring this machine was an army built around 10,000 elite guardsmen, the Immortals. King Xerxes, determined to avenge his father Darius's earlier defeat at Athenian hands, marshaled forces on a scale the world had never witnessed. Modern scholars put the true number near 250,000 soldiers, backed by roughly 1,200 warships. To even count them, his men herded soldiers through a fenced pen, 10,000 at a time. To cross into Europe, engineers lashed ships together into 2 floating bridges over the Hellespont. When a storm wrecked the first attempt, Xerxes reportedly had the strait whipped and the builders executed before trying again. He also drove a canal through the Athos Peninsula so his fleet wouldn't repeat his father's disaster there. Archaeologists confirmed the channel's existence in the 1990s. As his army swept through Thrace and Macedonia untouched, Xerxes demanded earth and water, symbols of surrender, from every city except 2. Athens executed his messengers outright. Sparta threw theirs down a well and told them to fetch their earth and water from there. Most other city-states submitted, but roughly 30 held firm, and together they chose to make their stand at Thermopylae, a narrow coastal corridor barely wide enough for 10 men abreast. Sparta's contribution hinged on a grim oracle. Either the city would fall, or a Spartan king must die. With religious law barring a full muster during a festival, King Leonidas took just 300 men, all fathers, so their bloodlines would survive them, while the rest of Sparta's army promised to follow later. To understand what those 300 meant, you have to understand Sparta itself, a society built entirely around war, where citizens fought and enslaved helots did everything else. Boys were pulled from their families at 7, starved deliberately to force them into thievery, beaten for getting caught rather than for stealing, and sent alone into the wilderness at 18 to survive by hunting helots at night. Money was cast in unwieldy iron bars precisely to discourage wealth. Nothing mattered but the discipline of the Phalanx. When Xerxes arrived and saw a few thousand Greeks blocking his path, he assumed they'd bolt. Scouts reported Spartans calmly combing their hair, their ritual before battle. Leonidas answered his surrender demand with a single line: "Come and take them." Wave after wave of Persian troops, the Medes, the Scythians, eventually the vaunted Immortals themselves, smashed into the hoplite wall and broke. Persian spears were shorter, their wicker shields no match for bronze, and the deep Greek formation let exhausted fighters rotate to the rear, while fresh men stepped forward. By the second evening, thousands of Persians lay dead for barely any Greek losses, and even the Immortals had been pushed back. At sea, a parallel struggle unfolded off Cape Artemisium, where 271 Greek triremes faced Xerxes' fleet. A brutal storm sank a quarter of the Persian ships before battle was even joined, and a second squadron sent to flank the Greeks was wrecked entirely overnight. Then treachery decided everything. A local named Ephialtes led a Persian column over the mountain trail. Leonidas had posted only lightly defended, catching the guards there by surprise and slipping past them toward the Greek rear. Warned just before dawn, Leonidas sent most of the army away and stayed behind with his 700 volunteer Thespians, and 400 reluctant Thebans. Even 2 Spartans too blind with infection to fight found a way to rejoin the line, one of them fighting to the death without ever seeing an enemy. Surrounded and pelted with arrows once close combat became too costly for the Persians, the defenders fell to the last man, fighting, Herodotus says, with broken spears, swords, and finally bare hands. 2 of Xerxes' own brothers died in the assault. Furious at the cost, Xerxes ordered Leonidas beheaded, and most of his own 20,000 dead quietly buried, hiding the scale of his losses. With the pass lost, the Greeks abandoned everything north of the Isthmus of Corinth, walling off the Peloponnese instead. Athens emptied out, though a small band of holdouts barricaded themselves on the Acropolis, until Persian troops found a hidden route up the cliff and slaughtered them at the altar of Athena. The city burned. Themistocles then gambled everything on a trap, Overruling allies who wanted to mass their ships defensively at the isthmus, he forced a fight in the cramped straits of Salamis by threatening to sail the entire Athenian fleet, 2/3 of Greece's ships, away to Italy if refused. He then leaked false intelligence to Xerxes, claiming the Greeks were about to flee, luring the Persian fleet into sealing the straits overnight. By morning, Persian numbers had become a liability. Ships jammed together, oars shattered against each other, and the famed Phoenician squadron got trapped between allied vessels. Greek triremes tore through the chaos, ramming and boarding at will. One of Xerxes' own brothers died boarding a sinking ship. Watching from a hillside throne, Xerxes saw his campaign collapse in a single afternoon and fled back to Asia with part of his army, leaving a starving, disease-ridden column to stagger home through hostile territory. Xerxes left his general Mardonius behind, with roughly 120,000 elite troops to finish the job. After Mardonius's peace overtures failed and he torched Athens a second time, Sparta finally marched out in force, 5,000 Spartiate warriors alongside thousands more allies, the largest army the city had ever raised. At Plataea, Mardonius tried to lure the Greeks onto open ground favoring his cavalry, lost his famed horseman Mecisteus when the Greeks finally cut him down, and cut off the Greek water and supply lines. A chaotic night withdrawal briefly split the Greek army into pieces, but when the Persians attacked believing the Greeks were routing, the Spartan phalanx held firm under arrow fire until the omens turned favorable, then crushed the Persian center, killing Mardonius himself with a thrown stone, before the whole Persian line collapsed and was annihilated storming their own fortified camp. On the very same day, across the Aegean at Cape Mycale, a Greek fleet destroyed the remnant Persian navy on land, aided by Ionian Greek conscripts who turned on their Persian officers mid-battle. In one day, on two shores, Xerxes' invasion was finished for good. Athens rose from its ashes into the age of Pericles, Sophocles, and Socrates. The traitor Ephialtes was hunted down and killed, and over the mass grave at Thermopylae, the Greeks carved a simple epitaph: "Tell the Spartans, stranger, that we lie here, faithful to their laws." A century and a half later, a young Macedonian king would march the opposite direction, from Greece into Persia, and erase the empire that had once darkened the sky with arrows.